Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get you top stories from India and the region. I am Tanvi Taneja. And for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in London, Ollie Barrett. Hello, Ollie.
Hello Tanvi, it's 12:30 p.m. here in London, 1:30 p.m. across Central Europe. Coming up in the next half hour, updates on the Taiwan quake. Live to Brussels where NATO foreign ministers are meeting, and the latest from the Middle East as well. Tanvi's got the headlines.
Taiwan rocked by biggest earthquake in 25 years. 9 people killed, over 800 injured, with at least 50 missing. President says rescuing trapped victims is utmost priority. Ukraine needs long-term, robust support, says NATO chief Stoltenberg, as NATO foreign ministers mull €100 billion military fund for Ukraine as the transatlantic military bloc turns 75 on Thursday. Iran's president says the attack on its consulate in Syria will not go unanswered. At the UN, the US warns Iran not to target it over Syria's strike. And we'll join you shortly with all those stories on DD India Global with me, Tanvi Taneja, and Ollie Barrett from London.
Voice of a rising aspirational world. Stories of challenges, struggles and accomplishment. A world battling conflict, hunger and poverty. Embracing growth, development, science and technology. A voice of progress, a voice of unity. Watch Voice of the Global South with me, Akshay Dongre, only on DD India.
The Himalayan state of Uttarakhand poised for the battle royale in the first phase. Will uniform civil code hold the key to the political heavyweights? Join us tonight on the Great Indian Election Battle for Uttarakhand at 8:30 p.m. IST only on DD India.
Wherever news breaks, whatever it takes.
Connecting corners, cutting across continents.
Stories that matter from across the globe.
Accurate, authentic journalism that serves you right. From politics to glamour, from sports to world affairs, with a fusion of aesthetics and substance.
Thank you for staying with us on DD India Global. First news from Asia. A 7.2 magnitude earthquake hit Taiwan on Wednesday morning local time, killing at least 9 people and injuring more than 800. The Taiwan Central Weather Administration said that the epicenter of the quake was in the waters off the eastern coastline of the island. The quake knocked out power in several parts of the island. An eyewitness filmed rocks and earth tumbling down the side of Gushan Island, which they said happened during the aftershocks to the massive earthquake. Meanwhile, officials in Taipei said that they have not received reports of major damage. The Chinese state media said that it was felt in Fuchao, Xiamen, Guangzhou and Ningde in China's Fujian province. Locals in Taipei were rattled after the quake. Taiwan's Central Weather Administration said that the aftershocks could be felt in Taipei. More than 25 aftershocks were registered in the region. The tremors caused landslides in eastern mountainous region of Hualien. Taiwan's fire department said that 1 person is suspected to have been crushed to death by falling rocks in Hualien. The area was the epicenter of the quake. Rescuers raced against time to help people out of a collapsed building in Taiwan's Hualien. The quake was the strongest tremor to hit the island in at least 25 years. A search for the trapped residents is underway as emergency personnel walk through the dark corridors while going door to door and calling out to residents in Hualien. At least 26 buildings have collapsed, more than half in Hualien, and these are the visuals coming live from Taiwan. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen has asked government agencies to continue to pay close attention to the situation in various places and initiate various contingency efforts.
The National Army will also provide support. The central and local governments will cooperate with each other to minimize the impact of the disaster. At this time, when there are frequent aftershocks, the government must ensure the accuracy of information and provide timely assistance to people in need so that people can feel at ease and safe. We are ready to work together.
Japan has issued an evacuation advisory for the coastal areas of the southern region of Okinawa. It had issued a tsunami warning, which has since been lifted. Japan's weather department said that tsunami waves of up to 3 meters were expected to reach Japan's southwestern coast. The Philippines has listed a tsunami warning that it had issued after the Taiwan quake. And DD India's Chris Gilbert is with us now from Tokyo. Chris, has the tsunami threat receded for Japan? Give us the latest.
Yeah, for now, Japan is in the clear, and I say for now because there are forecasts for the next week that there are significant aftershocks still to come. I mean, it was an abrupt start to a Wednesday morning for everyone, especially in the western Okinawan islands, who woke up to sirens and alarms, immediate evacuation orders. Everywhere they look, with potentially waves of up to 3 meters heading for them. That did not eventuate the highest waves that were reported in the western islands of Okinawa were about 30 centimeters. There were some waves recorded in parts of Taiwan that were closer to 70 or 80 centimeters. So about 8 hours ago, the tsunami warning was changed to an advisory and then cleared altogether. However, authorities and officials are urging vigilance that the danger has not passed, especially for those in Taiwan, where the attention has now turned, with the Prime Minister of Japan giving his sympathies to the people of Taiwan and saying that Japan stands ready to assist their neighbor and friend.
Okay, talking of Taiwan, Chris, at least 9 people are now reported to have been killed in the earthquake. What has been the scale of destruction so far?
Yeah, there's a mixture of reports coming in about the destruction. Of course, there are some absolutely dramatic images of, the structural integrity of buildings being knocked out from under them, leaning to one side, fallen, partially collapsed. However, reports suggest that the accessibility to the Hualien region county may be somewhat, under repair already. The early reports were of significant damage to infrastructure, bridges and tunnels. There are a number of people who remain trapped. There are reportedly about 60 people trapped in a tunnel north of Hualien, and there are about 50 people who are reportedly trapped in about 4 minibuses in a national park. They reportedly work in a hotel in that national park, were on their way to work on Wednesday morning when the earthquake struck. So in some ways of looking at it in terms of damage to infrastructure, or officials are saying it may not be as significant as originally feared. However, officials are stressing that they are still learning and assessing the scope of the situation. And these are absolutely the crucial hours for saving lives at the moment, the first 48 hours, and so that is 100% where the focus is, as well as getting aid and assistance to those who need it, and as I say, urging vigilance because they are expecting earthquakes for the next week, some almost as big in some forecasts potentially as the one that hit 8 a.m. local time in Taiwan on Wednesday, and so that can take already weakened buildings and completely floor them, as we've seen around the world in the past. So vigilance is being urged.
Okay. Chris Gilbert in Tokyo, thank you for those updates. On to Europe now. North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO will celebrate the 75th anniversary of its founding on Thursday. And for this, the bloc's foreign ministers are meeting today also to discuss military support for Ukraine in the days ahead. My colleague Ollie Barrett is in London. He gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Ollie, from choosing the next chief to providing continued support to Kiev, a lot on the agenda for NATO.
Very much so, Tanvi. There is a proposal for a $108 billion funding package on the table, as you say. The two-day meeting aims to have that aid package finalised in time for the NATO summit, which will be held in Washington, D.C. in July. The proposal by NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg would give the Western military alliance a more direct role in coordinating the supply of arms and equipment to Ukraine.
Ministers will discuss how NATO could assume more responsibility for coordinating military equipment and training for Ukraine, anchoring this within a robust NATO framework. We will also discuss a multi-year financial commitment to sustain our support.
Ukraine.
China's President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden have spoken on the phone in their first direct talks since a meeting in November 2023. US President Biden emphasized the importance of maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and the rule of law and freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. Xi Jinping said that ties between the two countries are beginning to stabilize, but warned they could slide into conflict or confrontation.
Feels obligated and responsible for protecting the national security interests of the United States. And much of his conversation with President Xi this morning, which was candid and constructive, very professional and businesslike.
The United States has warned Iran not to target it over an airstrike on Tehran's embassy in Damascus, insisting it had no prior knowledge or warning of the strike. At the United Nations Security Council on Tuesday, Deputy US Ambassador to the UN Robert Wood said the US would not hesitate to defend its personnel and repeated its prior warnings to Iran and its proxies not to take advantage of the situation.
Even as we continue to learn more about this incident, it seems clear that every member of this Council should reiterate that all states, including Iran and Syria, have a responsibility to avoid the path of escalation, to stop arming and advising terrorist groups, and to rein in the actions of proxies who threaten regional peace and security.
Tensions have raised between Iran and Israel after that strike on the Iranian embassy in Damascus on Monday. Iran claims the attack killed 7 people, including 2 generals. Tehran has accused US ally Israel over the attack and has vowed retaliation. Humanitarian aid has entered southern Gaza on Wednesday with trucks carrying relief material. This came after world leaders condemned the deaths of 7 aid workers in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. The World Central Kitchen charity immediately paused operations in the region after that strike. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described it as unintended and tragic. Britain summoned Israel's ambassador in London to express its unequivocal condemnation of the killing of the aid workers. And I think we can go back to Brussels now, where we will find DD India's correspondent Ishan Girg standing by to update us on the NATO foreign ministers meeting taking place there. Ishan, just tell us a bit more about that proposed funding package that's on the table and how it would work.
Well, the overall package is expected to be about $100 billion. And the idea, according to the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, is to provide Ukraine with a long-term, sustainable and dependable source of funding so that essentially it can plan its offensive. Speaking to the reporters this morning, he said that if Ukraine has that sort of visibility over funding in the long term, it will be able to plan its offenses a lot better. And of course, the idea also is to get the member state to contribute in a institutionalized way towards this facility, because Jens Stoltenberg has said that the member states will have to move away from these voluntary contributions and have a more structured approach towards providing military aid. Now, of course, this is also one thing that's being done, keeping in mind that there is chatter in Brussels about Donald Trump taking on the US presidency later in the year, and there are concerns here about that as well, and which leads us to our next point about NATO potentially taking over the Ramstein Group, the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, as well perhaps taking over the responsibilities of coordinating the supply of military aid to Ukraine. So all of that is on the table. We don't expect any decisions to come out of this meeting, but this will set the stage up for the Leaders Summit later in Washington later this year.
So that was our colleague from Brussels, Ishan Garg, and Ollie Barrett was in conversation with him. Ollie was joining us from London. Staying with Europe, this week it became legal for adults in Germany to carry cannabis for personal use and to have some at home. Germany becomes the 9th country to legalize recreational use of the drug, which is also legal in some subnational jurisdictions in the United States and Australia. The partial legalization of cannabis in Germany has been welcomed by many, but it has also been subject to fierce opposition by some. For more on this, let's hear from DW's Arthur Sullivan, who joins us from Berlin. Arthur, what exactly is being allowed in this law and what's not under the new law?
Right, so you said yourself partial legalisation, and the key word really here is partial. So in concrete terms, since the 1st of April, people in Germany over the age of 18 are allowed to own and carry up to 25 grams of cannabis with them for consumption. Now that's quite a lot. That's the equivalent of dozens of strong joints of cannabis. Now they can smoke it in public, but there are various restrictions, so they can't smoke it near schools, kindergartens, playgrounds, sports facilities, those types of places. And in addition to the rules on carrying cannabis, people are now allowed to grow up to 3 cannabis plants in their homes for their own cultivation, their own use, and they can store up to 50 grams of dried cannabis. Now the big thing with the law is that while it aims to relax the legal situation around usage, it also wants to make it harder to buy cannabis. So where will it be legal to obtain cannabis? Well, from the 1st of July, there is plans for private cannabis clubs to be established. They can have up to 500 members, and those clubs will be allowed to grow and distribute cannabis to their own members. Now, they won't be allowed to sell them to their members, and consuming on the membership club site will also not be allowed. And another key point, membership of those clubs will only be available to those living in Germany, and that's a move aimed at preventing tourists from getting involved. And as well, commercial stores will not be selling the drug. There's not going to be any cannabis cafes of the kind that people may perhaps associate with Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And while there were originally plans to allow certain pharmacies perhaps or shops to sell cannabis, that has been scrapped. So all in all, this has made Germany Europe's most liberal country with regards to cannabis use, but still with considerable restrictions on actually obtaining the drug.
Okay. And why has this law been brought in, Arthur? What do its supporters say in contrast to those who are opposing it?
Well, what cannabis enthusiasts and consumers have long called for is that cannabis should be made legal in the country. And their argument has long been that legalising cannabis would prevent already limited police resources being used to tackle small-time dealers and users. They say that for years, cannabis has been widely tolerated within the country. And Germany's government agreed in its coalition manifesto before coming to power in 2021 that it would legalise cannabis. And when introducing the new law in recent weeks, the country's health minister here says that The legalisation of cannabis is aimed at, first of all, controlling its use, preventing younger people here from turning to harder drugs, fighting the black market, which obviously is fuelled by demand for cannabis and other drugs, and also dealing with drug-related crime, which stems from that. And another key point he made is that legalising cannabis would prevent lower quality, potentially toxic cannabis from being widely used. And a phrase he used was that the government isn't trying to create a problem, but rather to deal with an existing problem. And another point that the government has made, which is true, is that illegal use of cannabis has been soaring for many years and that the law wasn't doing anything to deal with that problem. And it's also true that in Germany, public cannabis use is widely tolerated, as I said. It's got a very distinctive smell, and it's something that you will quickly detect on the streets of, for example, the capital Berlin if you spend any time here. And just as well, to put in context, those who are happy with the legalisation, they were out celebrating this week at Berlin's Brandenburg Gate the fact that it had become law.
All right. Thank you. Adi Sullivan joining us from DW Berlin. Still to come on DD India Global. The President of the Democratic Republic of Congo appoints Judith Suminwa as the country's first woman Prime Minister. And an exhibition on the 17th and 18th century China-France exchanges opens in Beijing.
Voice of a rising aspirational world. Stories of challenges, struggles and accomplishment. A world battling conflict, hunger and poverty. Embracing growth, development, science and technology. A voice of progress, a voice of unity. Watch Voice of the Global South with me, Akshay Dongre, only on DD India.
You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. The President of the Democratic Republic of Congo has appointed the country's former Minister of Planning as the Prime Minister. Judith Suminwa is the Central African nation's first woman premier. She has taken on the position at a time when an armed conflict has escalated in the east of the country. DD India's Chris Ochemringa reports from Kinshasa.
Judith Suminwa was named the new Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, ending weeks of leadership uncertainty in the country. The formation of a new government has dragged on for months after the elections last year. Ms. Suminwa is an economist who worked with the UN before being appointed a minister. Her appointment is the fulfillment of a campaign promise by President Felix Tshisekedi about improving the representation of women in the government. The new premier will be tasked with executing the president's priorities of improving the country's security, uniting the people, and leading them on the path of prosperity. During her acceptance speech, Judith Suminwa promised to work towards peace and development. She has taken over the role as fighting between government forces and the M23 rebels intensifies in the east of the country. The UN and African leaders have called on the warring parties to cease fire and engage in dialogue. But fighting continues. Chris Ochemringa in Kinshasa reporting for DD India.
And now we take a look at what else is happening around the world. Several migrants on Tuesday were stopped and sent back by the US National Guard to a dry riverbed where migrants gathered around fires. The controversial law that would let state authorities arrest and prosecute people suspected of illegally crossing the US-Mexico border is currently put on hold. Despite the ongoing legal battle, some migrants continue to try and cross into the United States. One person is dead, another 4 injured as the post-election protests entered day 2 in Turkey on Wednesday. Supporters of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's AK party clashed with opposition party. Protests spread to Turkey's southeastern provinces on Tuesday night after Turkish authorities prevented the newly elected mayor from the pro-Kurdish DEM party taking up his post in the city of Van. Sri Lanka's economy is showing signs of stabilization after the economic downturn of 2022. According to the latest biannual update of the World Bank, The island country's economy is projected to see a moderate growth of 2.2% this year, with a gradual increase in inflation. But it still faces elevated poverty levels, income inequality, and labour market concerns. The World Bank lowered Bangladesh's GDP growth forecast to 5.7% for 2025. The country has been fighting an economic crisis after the pandemic of COVID in 2019. The bank said that urgent monetary reform and a single exchange rate regime will improve foreign exchange reserves and ease inflation. And as we wind up this edition of DD India Global, we take you to Beijing, where an exhibition on exchanges between China and France from the late 17th century to the 18th century is now open for public at the Palace Museum. The exhibition focuses on diplomatic and cultural exchanges between China and France. So that's it in this edition of DD India Global. Join us for another edition of the show live from Washington at 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from my entire team in New Delhi and elsewhere. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.